And now for our main event. I mean, Atlanta is such a great place, and we've got this great panel here in front of us. But how many of you heard about why so many people are moving into Atlanta? What's the biggest one we just heard last week? Facebook, 1 million square foot of data center moving here to Atlanta, right? I mean, why is it such a great place to move, right? Waymo is going to bring in semis into, autonomous semis into Atlanta, right? I mean, that's what was announced this week. But why are they doing that? And for that, Chris, why don't you come up and introduce what's going to happen? And here we go. Why don't you grab that, Mike?
Yeah, and I think Cynthia will take the lapel.
Yeah, okay.
Test. Thank you, everybody, for showing up tonight and taking time out of your busy schedules. We've got a rock star panel set up for you this evening, and to moderate the panel, we've got Cynthia Curry. So, Cynthia, why don't you come on up, and we'll let Cynthia introduce our rock star panel. But Cynthia, many of you probably know she's with the Metro Atlanta Chamber. She's been leading the IoT.ATL initiative as well. So Cynthia's been in the industry and IoT, gosh, for at least 10, 20, 50 years at least, right?
50 for sure.
So please, come on up, take over, and the rest of the panelists, if you guys can
Y'all
come on up as
and
well.
we'll introduce everybody when you're sitting up here. Grab a seat. Thank you, Chris. Hopefully my phone won't ring while we're here. Oh, Saul's going to sit next to me.
Yes.
Fabulous.
I don't know what that is.
Saul. And then Kirk. I'm going to arrange your... Awesome. Welcome. So happy y'all are here. Hello, everyone. How's everyone? Excellent. Love it. Love it. So thank you so much, Chris. I'm so excited to be here. I've been coming to these meetings for a long time, and it's really an honor to get to lead one, and this is my favorite topic, so it's just meant to be. So we're happy that y'all are here, and we're going to learn a little bit tonight about smart cities and what it means and what everybody on the panel has to do with it. And so we're going to talk a little bit, and then we're going to take about 20 minutes at the end of the night and have some questions from the audience. So y'all can be thinking about what you want to talk about and ask about as we move through the program, so you'll have some time to ask questions and kind of get some insight from the panel. So I'm going to do a quick introduction, and then we'll go through some questions and have everybody talk about this. So Saul Salinas, right here with Accenture, is, first of all, I have to say that I work with the Metro Atlanta Chamber, and I'm the director of IoT ecosystem expansion with them. And our goal is to make Atlanta a global leader in IoT innovation and a smart city of the future. And Accenture did a study for us over the course of about 6 months, studying global trends in IoT and how Atlanta compares to that, and kind of helped us set out a strategy for making that happen. So I am deeply indebted to Accenture and the amazing work that they've done. So just a side note, so thank you, Accenture. And
Very happy
Mike
to be there.
Goodman's helping me right now do some more things. So y'all have a big impact, and we appreciate you at the Chamber very, very, very much. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for saying that.
So Sol's the global leader of Accenture's Smart Cities practice in North America, and the practice leader. He does development and maintenance of smart cities offerings and alliances and global partnerships and things like that. He helped expand the sustainability practice across Accenture, which is near and dear to my heart, and I think one of the things that smart cities is definitely going to help with in the future are sustainability and environmental issues. So he's a sustainability subject matter expert for over 25 years. And he's had positions in the EPA, and he's done water and environmental work, and he's just a pro in that area. So he's also served as the Assistant Office Director of the EPA Office of International Affairs with air, toxins, water, all of that. So we're very, very fortunate to have him, and he lives in Arlington, Virginia.
Yep.
With your wife?
Arlington,
and 3
Virginia,
children.
which is right next to Kansas.
It's Carlos's fault. He was talking about Kansas earlier, right? So welcome.
Thank you.
Yes.
Very happy to be here.
And then right next to him, we have Kirk Talbot, who I am really happy to have gotten to know through this role. And we've done a lot of great things together. And I always joke that Kirk is the man behind the curtain of all the smart ATL things that's happening in Atlanta. So he's the deputy CIO for CIO City of Atlanta. And he works for Public Works, Parks and Recreation, all the consumer-facing areas of City of Atlanta.
Actually, no, it's the entire city, so it's the back office and front office.
Okay, there we go. So he's all things smart city and smart ATL. So all the wonderful things that we have going on, Kirk has been an absolute instrumental part in making that happen. So we're thrilled to have him. And you live in Atlanta.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't live in
Yes.
Kansas, yes.
Fabulous.
It feels like I'm commuting from Kansas, yes.
Nice. And then we have Brian Johnson. And Brian is city manager for Peachtree Corners, and his background is in the Naval Intelligence and Security Agency. He held a plethora of amazing roles within that agency, and he's one of only 57 people that has earned the Credentialed Manager designation from our International Cities and County Management Association. So he started out in the military, and he's got a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Masters of Public Administration from UGA, yay. And he's a graduate of Harvard University's Program of Senior Executives, State and Local Government. And he is one of the Georgia Trend of 40 Under 40 honorees and this is my favorite, a two-time recipient of the Bronze Star Medal for Valor. So not many people can say that. So we're thrilled to have him, and can't wait to hear about what his city's doing. And then lastly, we have Brad Mandala, who is with Airbus, and they just opened a super cool, way cool office in Ponce City Market, and they're doing all kinds of crazy fun things with drones, and we'll let him talk about it all later. But he is leading the commercial UAS programs here in Atlanta, and he specializes in those deployments across the country. So who knows what UAS is? All right, so we're going to unmanned aircraft systems. So for the commons in the crowd like me, it's a drone, right? Am I right? So he works with drones and Airbus, and they're doing all kinds of super cool stuff with that. So he has an MBA from Purdue and a BAS in Military Intelligent Command and Control Systems from Wayland Baptist University. He has 2 pilot's licenses. I didn't get into the details of which kind because I don't know what that means. But he can fly a drone, and I learned tonight that you have to have a license to fly a drone. So he's going to tell us all about that. And he and his wife, Teresa, have 2 children, and they live in Brooks, Georgia. And I live in Decatur, and I have one 16-year-old son. So we're going to talk a little bit about smart cities and kind of what that means. And it's such a hot topic right now. So we're going to just start out with what, in your opinion, is a smart city? What does that mean to you? And who's good at it? And what kind of examples do you think are the smartest cities out there? So let's start with you.
Wow, thank you. First, let me just say I'm not one of the 40 under 40. I'm aiming to be one of the 100 under 100. So
Okay.
I have a little bit of time, right? So smart city, I think, first of all, congratulations for being here. Because I think the fact that you're here and you're interested in this topic makes you a futurist.
I agree.
It really does. I think those of us who work in this topic are privileged to be working in this topic. All of us, many of us, will be living in cities. Everyone's moving towards cities. So Kirk, be ready.
Yep.
And becoming smart. We at Accenture don't use the word smart when we talk about cities. It's in the title of my title. But we use the word sentient. Because if you think about it, if you look at the research, it'll tell you that within just 3.5 years, there'll be something like 26 sensors per every human being on the planet.
Wow.
Look it up, you'll find it. 26 per human being on the planet, and a disproportionate number of those will be in urban settings. You're surrounded by sensors here. And there'll be 6 devices for every human being on the planet that will ingest data from those 26 sensors per every human being on the planet. So we are going to get connected, like it or not. And cities like Atlanta and a few others are recognizing that that's a beautiful thing. That could be a very powerful, engaging thing to make happen, if you make it happen the right way. So in answer to your question about sort of what differentiates cities, and we see cities all over the world. I mean, I'm happy to be in a time zone that's familiar to me. I'm always next to Kansas, so I feel like I'm next to Kansas. But we spend time overseas, Singapore, the Middle East, cities in Africa, and we do work all over the world. And what we believe differentiates fundamentally a smart city from a city that claims to be smart is an appreciation for the holistic approach to deploying the technology of the Internet of Things, and an appreciation that the technology is a means to an end. It's not an end in and of itself. And I've had a lot of conversations, as I know Kirk has as well, with city officials and also the other colleagues on the panel, where there's sort of a sense that they're doing things because they can, because somebody came to them and said, I can do this. Okay, let's do it. Let's do it in this block of street. Let's do it with this department. Let's do it here. Because they can. And it's the temptation, and that's fine. And that's been the nature of things on smart cities for quite some time. And when you search on smart cities, you'll find projects. You'll find individual projects. Some of them are really cool. But I defy you to find a city that's really thinking holistically in a sentient way. And what I mean by that is an appreciation for the interconnectedness of all those devices and the insights that come from that connectedness and the new offerings, real-time human-centered offerings that are developed from those insights. And the commitment to fundamentally changing the human experience at the individual level, and to do it in a disciplined way. There are very few cities that are doing that. Atlanta happens to be one of them.
I agree.
And I'm not saying that just because I'm in Atlanta, because of the work that Cynthia's doing, because of the work that Kirk is doing and all his colleagues. They have appreciated the fact that, yes, they had to sort of first learn about the technologies and deploy them, as they've done, obviously masterfully, but have now come to the point where they're saying, now let's figure out what we do long term. And Kirk's old colleague, and I'll hand it to Kirk in just a minute, Samir Saini, who used to be the CIO here, said something to me which really stuck with me. He said, well, I asked him once, why are you doing the things that you do? And I think, Kirk, you may have been in the room. He said, you know what we're doing? We're lighting kindling because we can. And I said, but that's not going to last. Now we're going to have to light the fire. And we have to inject oxygen into the fire, financing and governance, et cetera, so that the fire will last. That's the difference. Cities like Atlanta, cities like Chicago, Toronto is beginning to go there. Certainly Dubai, Singapore, and other selected cities that are truly heading in that journey. So I'll stop there. Hopefully that answers your question.
No, it's good. I completely agree with that. Oh, he's mic'd up.
You're mic'd up.
You want to try and answer that?
Sure.
You got a mic? Yeah.
Well, let me dovetail on an important concept that Saul just said. Of course, I'm the city manager of Peachtree Corners, so I'm representing why I believe is the fact that when you think smart cities, you don't have to be the really large city like in Atlanta with a really large budget to be a smart city. Peachtree Corners is just under 50,000 people, so we don't have a lot of people. We don't have a billion-dollar budget. But we believe we're doing some things that are on par with ones that do, and I'll tell you why. Now, I'm going to borrow off of something that Saul just said, and that is, at the city, we believe in a smart city being the holistic approach. And by that we mean we can have all the technology deployed in the city that we want. We could have all sorts of sensors and gadgets and things that are cutting edge, but if all that data that's collected is not compiled and turned into or sent to the end user, which is our stakeholders, our people who live in the city, work in the city, and oftentimes travel through the city, if we can't get it to them for them to utilize and deploy that data, we're not all that smart. We have to, and so we believe in the full circle also. And so what we've tried to do is we've tried to do that in the capacity of deploying some pretty innovative things. Like we're only about 5.5 years old. For those of you who don't know, the epicenter of technology in Metro Atlanta was Peachtree Corners in the 80s, because Tech Park Atlanta is in Peachtree Corners. We were created out of that concept up there. And so technology is really important to the mayor and council of Peachtree Corners, and so my job is to meet that. So what we've done is we're building a new downtown right now, which we're deploying all the smart city technology that we know of. Our parking deck we're putting in has the pucks to tell you exactly which space is open and, which level it's on, and there's, Wi-Fi throughout the whole thing, and the street lights dim and get brighter as the vehicles, and all that kind of stuff. But that's all great, but it sounds good unless we can get it to our end users. So we have a city app that we just launched a couple months ago, in which all that data will go into our city app, and our end users can get access to it. So they can find out if there's an open parking deck, or when the event's starting, or you can get into it, what the barometric pressure is at a certain location. And so we feel like closing that loop makes us, at least closer to being able to say we're a smart city than other cities. So I don't know, other things we can add. I can talk a little bit about, we're launching an actual autonomous vehicle in the city, so we can talk about that a little bit later. But that's kind of how we think of ourselves, is it can be done at a mid-city level range. You don't have to, be really big, but you just got to kind of close that loop to make sure that you do have that holistic approach. If not, it's just, there's a lot of effort, but not a lot of gain, so.
So I kind of take a unique approach to this. I don't actually think there is smart cities. I think we have smarter cities. But what the problem is, before I joined Airbus, I was with Google, and we had worked on a lot of different projects. Sidewalk Labs was launched out of Project X. We used a lot of different aspects to bring data together. But as a couple panelists have already mentioned, it really comes down to data fusion. What do you do? We have so many sensors, but what did you say, 32 per person, or we're going to have something like that? You send aircraft up into space, and Project Loon would gather 75 terabytes of data every 6 hours, and that's just for weather. All right, so imagine over one full day, you have 300 terabytes of data of weather patterns at a specific altitude. Now you multiply that by streets, you multiply that by weather sensors, you multiply that by, you want to understand what moisture, where your water's moving, gas leaks, and all of a sudden you have so much data you don't know what to do with it. And so that's kind of where I see the differences, is we have smarter cities because we have so much data. It's how do we learn from it? How do we leverage it? And how do we provide useful applications out of it? How can we do it to affect change, and how cities are efficient in a meaningful way? And, maybe I'm getting off topic here, but that's kind of where I see where the direction everything heading is, and everybody's going to have a niche that they try to go in. Getting that holistic view is the end goal. And to be honest, with all the different technologies that are coming out there and all the different platforms, I think it's going to take a government, or it's going to take, a company that specializes in that data to actually fuse it all together. Otherwise you're just swimming through lakes and lakes of data trying to find a nugget here and there. But if you find that nugget, that's great, until you can't provide any context to it to give somebody else something that they want to do. And that's kind of my take.
Kirk, do you want to add anything? Are you passing on this?
I think most of it's been said. I think, having been in this space for a few years now, Saul hinted at it, there's probably more hyperbole at this phase than there is real content. I think back to the marketing pushes of cloud. I think back to other things where 5 minutes after the marketing term caught on, everybody been doing cloud for 20 years. And you're like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. You hear the same thing. And because you get all that hyperbole, people get confused about what the definitions are.
Right.
I focus less on what the definition is and who's doing the best, which is also a very loose statement. And I focus more on what they've hinted at, that to me, it takes even a step beyond the data. It's closer to what you said about a sentient. To me, the smartest cities are the ones that are constantly adapting to their constituents' needs. And if wireless happens to be the technology that allows them to take the next step, did I go out? No. Then that's great. 5 years from now, it may be something else. So it's that constant improvement of the services they deliver that are the smartest cities. And absolutely, the smartest ones have latched on to what you can now do with data analytics, what you can do with predictive analytics, machine learning, all that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, data is no good unless you get insight from it, right? So the beauty is in the gathering of the data and the producing of the insight at the end of it. But I'm going to toot Cork's horn a little bit here. I mean, I think Atlanta, I've seen a lot of smart cities and done a lot of traveling around and talking to people. And one of you touched on it. A lot of cities are doing cool because it's cool. And Atlanta's been really deliberate about making sure that the Smart Cities projects have aligned with the core pillars, which are mobility, sustainability, public safety, and operational efficiency. Am I right? Is there one
And
more?
the last one's civic and economic engagement.
There we go.
Yeah.
So everything that they've done is really deliberately focused to one of those areas, and I think that's one reason that Atlanta has been really able to thrive as a smart city and has really come a lot farther than a lot of cities because they're not doing cool for cool purpose. They're doing things that really have meaning. So since you won't toot your own horn,
Thank you.
I'll do that. And then I'm going to also do a plug for Deborah Lamb, who was going to be on this panel, and she couldn't make it. But you talked a lot about smart city doesn't have to be a large city. And Deborah Lamb runs the Georgia Tech Diversity Smart Cities group, and she has just launched a Georgia Smart Cities Challenge for the whole state of Georgia, similar to the DOT Challenge. And she's taking smart cities technology and offering it to all of the rural areas of Georgia. So that's happening right now. So if y'all want more information on it, I'm happy to give it to you or pass her information forward. But it's going to be a way that Georgia's going to be a really forward-thinking state, because it's not just going to be city of Atlanta that's smart. It's going to be all of Georgia that's smart, and she's helping make that happen with a core of mentors that are going to be moving through the process with them for a year and hopefully getting some tangible results at the end. So good job, Kirk, and all your work. So we talked a little bit about cities, smart being cities for smart's sake. So when you think of smart cities, what do you think the goal should be? What do you think you should be looking to accomplish, and what value ultimately are the cities looking to get out of the smart city realm, and what do you think they should get out of the smart city realm? What's the end result in your mind that we should be aspiring to?
The example I use typically in answering your question like that is, imagine a scenario where you're not asking Siri or Alexa for the temperature of the room, or where is Singapore, whatever, or Kansas for that matter. But imagine asking Siri a question that requires some thought, meaning some connections of data that Siri has to sort of be able to report out to you. Meaning something like 5 years from now, I'm sitting here, and I'm on a borderline of a cold, and I reached out to Siri, and it's a three-dimensional screen, by the way, because the kind of work that we saw in Smitty, the two-dimensional display on a mobile phone is temporary. Eventually, we'll be interacting with, you'll be able to project an image, as per Star Wars.
Yeah.
That will tell you,
VR
that you'll
without
interact
the
with
headset.
on a verbal. I mean, like I said, we're futurists. And again, this is the kind of thing that I think is important to continue to think about. The work that we're doing here is the beginning. So where are we headed? I think we're headed to a point where Smitty, version 8 will be a three-dimensional image of whatever character you want. And if you were leaving this place an hour from now, you'll say, hey, Smitty, I'm not feeling really well. Where's the nearest drugstore? I need to pick up some medicine. And once I get there, how long will it take me to get to the hotel? And please check me in. I mean, it sounds crazy, but that is the kind of data that will be available to us if, in fact, all these sensors are connected and they make their way into a single platform. And that platform is one that's designed around user outcomes, and I'm able to interact with it in a next-generation interface. That's where we're headed. We are at the very beginning of that. And some of the stuff that we're seeing actually is close to that. I mean, the idea of being able to do cross-analytics on data that's getting ingested from either a traffic light or the check-in counter at the Marriott or the Hilton, relative to the data that's being collected from a light pole that's weather data, all that stuff will get connected. If we do our job right,
Yep.
it will get connected. And it makes no point to connect that data unless you're able to sort of then ask for the insights that that data makes possible. That's where we're headed. And by the way, there is an example of that. Accenture worked with a couple of other partners in Barcelona to develop a platform that enables you to verbally interact with the city. So that you ask the city, you probably saw this maybe in Barcelona, you ask the city, tell me how much traffic there will be in this block of next to 2 blocks away from Las Ramblas in Barcelona in the next 2 hours, and what will the weather be? And it may not get it right, but it understands the question. 5 years from now,
Which is saying something, right?
5 years from now, it will get it right. So that's pretty cool. Got to
That's
start
right.
somewhere. Atari became Xbox.
See, I think you were a pessimist. You said it earlier. It's not that in 5 years you ask Siri to tell you those things. I would hope that in 5 years we've interconnected the information, we've democratized the information that the city knows, and Siri, if you've so enabled it, says, hey, I see that your temperature's up, it looks like you're not doing well, I went ahead and
Yes.
threw the nearest CVS into your routing. Because it'll have the information to make those predictions, right? That's not that far out. What we lack, and hopefully we can get in the next 5 years, is the integration of that information into insights that the AI can then actually, if you're comfortable, go ahead and change your course based on that, right? To me, where we want to go, it's always about delivering better services for the same price or lower. But to me, there's a few components to it, which is cities should deliver better service, and there's 1,000 ways you can do that. It could be predictive service before you need it. It could be predictive road surfacing so you never have another pothole, right? Because you've anticipated the failure of the pavement and you've addressed it beforehand, or you've anticipated the failure of a bridge, so there's never a bridge situation. We won't talk about
Way to
last
bring that
March.
up, Kurt.
No, is it too soon? Too soon, sorry.
Too soon.
There's always outliers. But the second thing, and give credit to Samir about this, is the democratization of data.
Yeah, he
One
always
of the
talked
things
about
is
that.
cities will never have enough resources to deliver all the insights and services that the community wants. But cities will probably have the resources based on their asset base to be the source of a lot of rich data that, if it's democratized, other people can develop the apps. They can develop the Siri app that sends you to the nearest CVS and pre-orders your Theraflu or whatever it is, right? But the city won't do that. So you have to democratize that data. So I think that's one of the key pieces.
Talk about what you mean by that, like open data portals and.
So it's open data portal, and I will wander into a fascinating model that we're all rushing to figure out. The first step is absolutely making that data available. If the data has been generated with taxpayer dollars, then it is a public asset. There's no other way to look at that. However, there are costs above and beyond when you start to get into that detail. I had a mentor that used to always say, details cost money, right? Every time you go down an order of magnitude in detail, you go up an order of magnitude of cost, because you've got to manage that detail. So this additional terabytes of data will have to be handled, and there's a cost to it. So I think the second wave is, after everyone's democratized the data, made it open, put it into APIs. So when you ask for data, you're not downloading a PDF that you then have to go and retype and do optical character recognition, but you make a city that's API aware. Then you have to figure out, how can you monetize that from a reasonable standpoint? And every community is going to have a different balance on that. I had a fascinating conversation in Europe, and Europe being what they are, they have a radically different position on monetization. But the reality is, we tend to believe that data is the next utility. There's going to be phenomenal value, and we already see the market moving in this way. Everyone's trying to get market positions to be the ones that own the data, which tells you there's value in it. That value, if it's generated from tax dollars, should be returned back to the tax people to support the infrastructure to allow a better community, right?
And
So
to
I think
support
you're
the
going to
growth
see,
of it.
to support the growth,
Yeah.
to enable economies that couldn't have happened without it. I always liken it back to streets. Cities are great places that people want to be because it's easy to get around and you can interconnect with other people, right? That's really what it's about, the interconnectedness. Streets are the means to do that. If data becomes that interconnectedness in the next wave of the economy, then it's all about how easy is it to get to that data and move that data around so that you can get better insights.
Yeah.
So cities are in the business of facilitating a better community,
Yeah.
a richer community. And so all of this is working towards what's the richest, most connected community we could have. And then what are they going to do with it?
Excellent. What are y'all's thoughts?
Yeah, so immediately you guys started talking about, basically what I liken to workflows and decision making. So say in the hypothetical future, we have a president that gets on Twitter and says,
We're talking 3 minutes in the future?
says, I'm going to go visit Atlanta, Georgia to talk about something like this. A smart city would sit there and go, great, the president's coming into town. We need to implement a VIP TFR, which is a temporary flight restriction around this number of airports. We need to activate, the right police or just police presence to secure the route from where he's going to go. We're going to need to understand the impact that's going to have on traffic in the morning. Are schools going to be late? Do parents need to react to that? And it's just more about awareness. Like we already have, you go, okay, Google, I want to do this, and then show me this answer. But it's going to be what's called a workflow of answers and the impacts that it has all the way through and the impacts it has on a city based off all those sensors. Or let's say the president didn't tweet, but something else happened that showed up and you get an impact to the water supply, sewer starts overflowing. How does that then affect the traffic if there's, a fire across the city and our EMS is already working somewhere else? So it's more of like an asset, like a big Gantt chart, if you will, of what a program manager would do to sit there and allocate resources to different aspects, but doing it in a more intelligent manner. So giving you the tools you need. I still think, human involvement's going to be here for some time. I don't think machines are going to be able to replace us. They're going to be able to think faster. They're going to be able to find context in that data. And it really comes down to is how do we create dashboards? How do we create levers that we can provide to decision makers within our cities, within our communities, that can then go ahead and work off of that? And I think that's probably where we're going to see things start to shift in the future is
Yeah.
giving people those tools.
Yeah, the tools. That's great.
The one thing that is interesting when you talk about this and about some of these exciting things is that for all of them, there's of course the aspect, the challenge, the obstacle. And I know I struggle daily trying to push as much resources to some pretty cool things that can be deployed to balance that against oftentimes sitting in rooms that are 10 times the amount of people who only believe that conventional public resources should be used on conventional public things, like patching potholes and another police officer and, things like that, which are legitimate arguments.
Yeah.
But I know what we have tried to do, and a lot of cities have done, Atlanta does this too, that have decided to officially dip their toe into a pool of, trying to get smarter, that's beyond what your typical cities are doing, is to try to do a little bit of both. And I know in our case, we're trying to use technology right now to benefit our residents right now. So that's kind of half of it. So for instance, parking pucks on, in a parking deck to let you know, adaptive traffic signals on roadways. We got the second busiest roadway in Gwinnett County outside of I-85 going through the city. A lot of traffic going through to and beyond. And so adaptive traffic signals to adapt to disruptions in the cycle and all that kind of stuff. So that's real stuff that we can generally get past most of the conventional voters who, say, hey, that's my money you're dealing with. Don't go too into Star Trek land on me. But so we have a lot of those, but we also have tried to, again, facilitate what we can into some of this stuff that's even outside of my pay grade. And, we created a tech incubator within Tech Park, in which that's kind of the side of the house that we've kind of cut them loose and really tried to wind them up and say, go and, do some things that are a little bit outside the norm. And we are, just this week, we decided to create purchase an autonomous vehicle and create autonomous vehicle corridor within Tech Park Atlanta
Nice.
as a test platform for R&D within the autonomous vehicle, because it's not there for we don't need it for the ridership, but we are sitting in a unique, and so that's kind of the side of the house that's a little bit more extreme, but municipalities have to balance man, that's cool, and let's really do more. I'd love to, but for every one of those, you get a lot of people who are like, whoa, I got, drainage problem in my backyard you need to fix first, so.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, to me, a lot of people don't really, it's invisible, right? I mean, smart cities and IoT technology, you don't really see it. But I think the key is articulating the value that it has to the citizens. I mean, the smart corridor, which is happening in front of Ponce City Market, has done a lot of things for Atlanta just in the past 6 months. I mean, we've saved $100,000 on recycling costs, right?
Yep.
We've reduced traffic time after large events by 50%. We've reduced normal traffic time by 25%. There's probably a ton more stuff that I'm missing. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's traffic delays are only 5%, which I know doesn't sound as sexy, but from a traffic engineering standpoint, that's a massive impact. And its accidents have dropped by 25%.
Okay,
on
yes,
that corridor,
okay, perfect.
which is
But
big, yeah.
It's giant. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a fourth, right? So these are the things that the community might not really be able to realize are happening. So it's kind of our role to push the message out there that this is what's happening and this is how it's benefiting you, and we're improving sustainability and environability and saving the planet for your children. So it's all up to us to articulate that, which is why we do things like this. So
Well, a subtle build on that, we realized early on, like you said, you can only have a sliver of your budget to true R&D, which is the commercial equivalent of it. And it's typically got to be buried under some other line item, because if it's called out, people go, no. So what we've done is, yeah, not at all. No, not at all. I know where you hide the money. But what we did was, because you needed more of that money, we split our R&D, if you will, into two groups. One is the public-facing benefit.
yeah,
And that you have to spend a lot of time explaining, hey, you know that accident you didn't get in last week?
right.
You're welcome, right? Because you don't know you didn't get in an accident, but statistically, we have to educate that didn't happen. But the other half of the R&D, and it's not split literally, is you put it into cost savings, so that we now don't need 500 police officers, we need
right.
499 to deliver the same results on the street, and we just freed up dollars to then go put into more R&D. So it's cost avoidance, and that's where things
And
like
crime reduction, we have
crime
acoustic
reduction.
sensors that hear gunshots and automatically detect what kind of gun it is, where it is, and automatically detect the emergency services. So you should talk about these things.
When you ask that question, I'll start rattling off the amazing in our portfolio. But I don't want to get into bragging. There isn't
I'll
enough
brag
time to
for
that
you.
point. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's hard to communicate all the things that are happening
It is.
because you don't have a forum where people talk about what the city's doing every day.
This is it.
This is This is it.
I was just going to add a thing.
And we got how many minutes?
Brian said a very important thing, and I think, Kirk, you touched on it right before he mentioned this. So the question that we get almost in every city that we speak with, and that's how you pay. How do you pay for it? How do I pay for it?
That was my
It's
next
easy.
question.
It's easy.
ROI, let's talk about
Yeah,
that.
it's easy for us to sort of come in and give you this great vision of where you need to be by the year 2040 and three-dimensional holograms telling you where the drugstore is and all that.
Right.
The question Brian asked is, what have you done for me lately, and how do I
Right.
pay for it 6 months from now, and where do I start? So we're sort of beginning to discover a common thread, which is it's possible to pay for some of the quick wins that have significant ROI by tapping into the gold mine that's surrounding us, and that's the old infrastructure. And let me give an example, and that's lighting. Many cities in North America, I can give you a percentage, still use old incandescent lights on their street lights, or CFLs, or certainly high-pressure sodiums. And many cities, including the city of Atlanta, have recognized that there are significant ROIs by simply converting those old, quote-unquote, technologies, including high-pressure sodiums, to LEDs. Number one, because you get significant ROI on that, could be as high as 50% in some instances. And you can multi-purpose that old infrastructure to do some really cool things, the stuff that Brian and Kirk and all of us have talked about. like put video cameras on those, or put sensors for weather sensors, et cetera. And now you begin to combine two things. You can begin to combine cost savings, cost takeouts from that lighting, assuming the city owns the infrastructure and the city owns a fair percentage in Atlanta, and the vision to sort of do some really exciting things that consumers are willing to pay for because the ROI may not be there. So in other words, if you figure out a way to sort of bank those savings across that specific aspect of your old infrastructure and harvest it and repurpose it, now you perhaps have a cash cow that you can begin to do some things with.
At a minimum, we see two things. One is we consider it a lot of our effort in pushing technology a little bit beyond maybe what a lot of people be comfortable with as an economic development tool.
No question.
Because, again, oftentimes if you get certain technologies, and we've seen it not too long ago, if you got fiber to a location, it oftentimes started to attract, a tenant of a building that you wouldn't get if you didn't have it. And so we're doing that. We feel like the autonomous vehicle is going to be that economic development. The other thing, too, is we haven't yet, Mayor and Council made the commitment, we'll kind of absorb, it's a sunk cost, but we have geofencing on our city app where when you hit the city limits, it'll start feeding you information specific to the city. Waze does it a little bit where you're sitting at an intersection and there's a Dunkin' Donuts, you're sitting there and all of a sudden there's an ad for Dunkin' Donuts, hey, there's a special. We've got that. You can monetize that. A lot of companies will say, hey, we'll pay to be able to put ads on there. So there are ways to monetize it beyond even the ROI that you talked about.
The one point I want to make here, long time ago, I joined the military. And while overseas, I flew military UAS. And I remember there's one mission, doing a roadway patrol. And we saw some insurgents and placing an IED on the side of the road. And immediately when you do that, you start scanning around to see what else is going on in the region. And we saw this convoy of the U.S. Marine Corps. I was United States Army. They're United States Marine Corps coming down the road. And, I could see them. And they're 2 miles coming up on this bomb. And it was like, I didn't have the radio codes to get a hold of them. So I called back to my tactical operations center, like, hey guys, got some Marines heading down toward this road, and we got a bomb that's going to blow them up. We need to call them and let them know. Well, we don't have the right crypto loaded in our radios, and we don't know the frequency to talk to these folks to let them know what's happening. Long story short, we ended up crashing the drone in front of the convoy just to stop them. But
Yeah.
so what we liken it to nowadays is it's awesome you guys have an app, and you have another city has an app, but unless those apps are talking to each other across a common platform, let's say I drive into Peachtree Corners. If I don't have that app installed, I'm not going to trigger that geofence. And it's like, how do we cross that boundary to make things communicate better? And I really think that's one very important key. And there's got to be something out there, and I'm sure you guys are already working on that. Obviously that's not my area of expertise, but that's just one thing I think.
Can I add a quick point on that?
Absolutely.
My story isn't nearly as dangerous or as that one. I was on the Acela.
Not as cool.
Not as cool. I was on the Acela up to New York, which I take off in. and
It goes
I'm
to Kansas? That's good. I didn't know they expanded.
You're not in Kansas anymore.
No, not in Kansas. Okay.
And the number of times I got disconnected, I just couldn't believe it. I mean, the number of times, whether I'm on my cell or on my Skype or on Wi-Fi, I got bumped off
Yeah.
calls every 10 minutes. That's inexcusable.
Yes.
And so to your point, right, what's going to happen, we think at Accenture, our point of view on this is that right now, connectivity is kind of a nice to have. It's sort of a luxury, right? I mean, if you get bumped off a conference call with your colleagues, you can call them back in 5 minutes. Eventually, we're going because of the connectivity we've spoken about, we will rely more and more on that real-time connectivity. So it's not going to be just, I can't give you the edits on this Word document on the SharePoint thing at the same time. It's going to be my security, my safety, perhaps the safety of my children will be dependent on being connected. and being able to connect with somebody in real time and have multiple platforms communicate with each other, because that's where we're evolving to. And so that becomes a real necessity, and
Yeah,
that
it's
puts
not
a
a luxury
real
anymore.
burden and responsibility. It will not be a nice to have 5, 10 years from now. It's going to be a must to have.
I'll go so far as to say, we're already there. And an example of that is, one of the first cities that I managed was in coastal Georgia, Savannah suburb. And we had a hurricane come in, and it knocked out a lot of the communication. And you would be surprised how vulnerable you feel when, there's not a lot of landlines like there used to be. People like, I don't need that, I have my cell phone. And when the cell phone's not working, the emergency, responders can't talk to each other oftentimes. They're not on the same net. They don't have the same, crypto, whatever it is. There are certain cases we're there already, and it's scary.
Here's a cool concept. If you're in the telecommunications, how many of you are in the telecommunications? And I suspect many of you are. This is a concept that you and I heard about at the Docklands in Dublin. Kirk and I were together at a sort of a retreat, and I thought this was really a sort of an interesting, innovative idea. And that's, I'm going to use a term. Maybe there was another term that you, but I'm going to use it as redundant connectivity. 5G cubed, call it what you will, which is ensuring that with the geography in which we reside has connectivity from Wi-Fi, LoRa, 5G, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if one drops, the other one's there. That sort of makes sense to me. I mean,
Yeah.
right? In other words, it doesn't make sense from a bandwidth standpoint, from a competitor standpoint, all those things. But from a end user standpoint, that sort of kind of makes sense to me. Because if I'm on the Acela and my 5G drops, boom, the Wi-Fi. Of course, we have some of that, but I'm saying consistent, redundant 5G or 6G, whatever it is, cubed connectivity.
And there are carriers that are starting to focus on that for emergency
Yes.
situations, right? So we're starting there, and then it'll move
Correct.
to the commons,
To the
right?
rest of us.
So I just want to clarify,
Go.
and then I want to give a shout out to Atlanta, because it's not me, I can give this shout out. First, it wasn't a retreat. There were no pools, or it was a.
There's no spa.
That's right.
Maybe
That was for
your
the rest of
hotel
us.
had- yeah,
That was
I
for the
didn't-
rest of us.
No, it was sleeves rolled up, hard work, 60 hours a day. Now,
A workshop.
it was a
Okay.
sweatshop.
There we
It
go.
was- It was grueling. So the shout out I want to give to Stephanie Stuckey. She's the city's first chief resiliency officer. And when you go back to the definition of a smart city, it's not just continuing to further the adoption of technology, because it can. It also includes that resilience, which is your point. One of the things that scares a city more than anything else is building out an infrastructure that becomes so critical that the slightest disruption of it shuts down the city. Again, I'm going to go. Or a bridge, one of those things. Yeah, but water main too soon. I think we can talk about the bridge. Water main, not yet.
But a sensor could have prevented that. Just saying. Go ahead.
So I think part of the definition of a smart city is not just a technological advance, it's a resilient city. And to that, you can use multiple technologies to make sure if one fails, the city can still perform, right? That is a really key distinction. And I want to give the shout out to the fact that the mayor did put together a team of resilience, and they're focused on it. They're part of a community, Bloomberg's 100 Resilient Cities, that across the world are collaborating and sharing and figure out how do we not just make the space better, but how do we make it respond better to disaster and catastrophe.
Or have it not happen at all, as you
Or
alluded
prevent
to
it,
first.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that is the whole
That's even
end
better.
goal, right? Is that there's sensors around the pipe so that the water main doesn't break. There's sensors on the bridge so that it tells you that the concrete is, not secure. There's sensors in the airport that smell the gas and hear it. I mean, all of these things are preventable as we move forward and as we become more advanced in our technology. These are the advantages that smart city technology can bring, and that's what we want to proclaim and evangelize, is that it's not just cool for being cool. I mean, it does have real value for the citizens and for the city, and ultimately that saves tons of money and people's time and efforts getting around the city. Yes, go ahead.
And I was going to say, in a normal situation, that's absolutely correct. But what do we do when a cat event happens, and you have a catastrophe? You have a hurricane come through, tornado, and it upsets your redundant infrastructure,
Right.
and all that. And it's having the tools and policies in place, self-healing mesh networks. It's bringing in UAS with communication relays. It's providing again live context to the first responders. The situation on the ground, and it has to get in addition to being more efficient, we have to get into the contingent response.
And Samir did a good job of that, from what I understand, of setting the foundation of the basics were first improved
Yeah.
before he moved to the higher technology. So that if something failed, the foundation, without all the upper technology, there was a backup, right?
Yeah.
So we have that in place in Atlanta, if I understand correctly.
Yes.
Yes. Excellent. So let's just, this is quick, because we want to make sure and get to questions, and I don't want to, deprive the audience of asking. So quick. Who do you think is doing the best job of smart cities, and what do you think the smartest city is in your opinion? Oh. I like her.
Who's the second, you mean? Who's the second?
Who's the second smartest city behind Atlanta?
Singapore and Dubai.
All right. What do y'all think?
You go ahead, you see more than I do.
I would say Dubai and then Singapore. Yeah, absolutely, for every reason we described. I mean,
Not
honestly.
democracies, though. So
Well, it
it's
is,
easy.
look, this is a good point. It is easier.
You're
there.
doing this.
It is easier. If the sheikh says, you do. But I will say that in the case of Dubai, the focus on an ultimate outcome, an ambitious one, being the happiest place on planet, like it or not,
It is
is an aspiration
Good
that's
end goal.
laudable.
Couldn't agree.
Absolutely.
I
right.
agree. Couldn't agree more.
Atlanta, but what if we could do that?
Well, you were in the room.
Her?
Do that.
You mean have a top-down authority that says what we're going to do?
Or
Or
you
have
mean-
billions of dollars? Which that are we referring to?
No, a framework.
Oh. So we are madly working towards a framework, actually. There is a very interesting RFP that we've actually put out on the street that I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about.
Yes.
Which
Is it open? Please tell us.
it is absolutely open until March 27th, so please get your submissions in. The easiest way to describe it, though, is we're looking for proposals to, instead of piecemealing the technology, laying down one common platform that has the wireless, that has all of the capabilities and the capacity, so that we can then build over the next 10 to 20 years all of the amazing use cases on top of it, and finding a financially viable way to make it self-supporting. That's the easy way to describe it. You have to read the RFP to get the good parts. To answer
is
your
very
question,
long. Yes.
well, the guts of it are about 18 pages.
I'm
The rest
just
is
saying.
boilerplate. Just jump to the statement of work. I won't say who the smartest city is, but one of the ones that inspires me is Las Vegas.
Okay,
They don't
why?
get a lot of press time, but when you look behind the curtain and see a lot of the things that they've been doing and the way the mayor approached it, it was really smart.
Okay.
And I'll leave it at that. You can research it. But they're doing a lot of interesting stuff that doesn't get the press time that you
Okay.
would ordinarily hear from a Dubai or a Singapore.
Okay. Do y'all have an opinion?
I don't have an opinion of the current state. I am watching the UAE, and NEOM is definitely or I'm interested in following and see what they do. But I mean, that's easier, right? When you can build something from the ground up, you can do it
Right.
right.
You're not
Right.
trying to retrofit,
Exactly.
yeah, old infrastructure,
Yeah.
which is challenging. All right, so questions.
And I'll answer it.
He's asking about how cities can be aware of what's happening, and there's an idea floating around about a smart city gallery in Atlanta, so he was asking about that. So let's hear about
Okay,
that.
so you're right. The small, the medium, and the large cities have different challenges and different opportunities. And in some ways, the small cities can move a lot faster and can innovate faster. The larger cities have more resources, whatnot. But one of the things we've noted in our exploration, there's a significant cost to figuring out who's doing what. And the reality is a lot of cities are being duplicative, and that's not bad right now because we're all rushing to figure out which projects make sense for investment, which ones are economically viable, and which ones are a waste of resources. So the idea that she's referring to, we're working with Metro Chamber of Commerce, Invest Atlanta, and a few others to see if we can put together a gallery that allows us to showcase the best examples from all the cities around the world that says, here's who's doing what, with the intent of helping all the cities, the small, the medium, and the large, understand rapidly what is this space, what's the bleeding edge of it, and where's the real value
In a vendor-neutral way.
in a vendor-neutral way.
Correct.
So we're all interconnected in 1,000 different ways. It's coming together. We're actually working with the UN as well on it. So there's a whole bunch of layers, and nothing is definitive yet. We're exploring what's the best model to pull that off. But we recognize that if all the cities are going to win, the faster we can cross-pollinate ideas and see where the real value is, the better everyone is, the faster the market comes together.
Yep.
He's asking about latency and 5G and the effect that it will have.
So
if you
my
don't have
question
it.
comment
How do you
about
quantify the benefits? I mean, it's a good question, right? I mean, when you talk about sort of monetizing value, you're not talking about just repurposing savings from lighting infrastructure. You're talking about the potential. Let me give you an example, and I'm going to go back to Dubai if I could.
No, you've seen it all, so yeah.
But let me sort of give you an example. Dubai is their marquee event that will sort of, they see as being a signature event that will showcase the city in Smart Dubai is an annual world fair called Expo 2020. And they recognize that that's going to draw a lot of people. And in seeking expertise from the commercial players, including Accenture and others, they said the following, they said, look, you know, we want you to partake. If you're going to help us solve this issue of how to make this a truly connected event that will showcase what the art of the possible for Dubai, we want to give you a piece of the action, if you will. Meaning, if you can give us a sense of how much value this event will create, not only during its lifetime, but beyond its lifetime, across the city of Dubai and UAE in general, and you give us sort of the methodology and all that, if you can sort of give us a sense, we'll give you a part of that. So in other words, there's a recognition of exactly what you just said, which is there's value to be created. Kirk said this earlier. There's monetized value to be created from use cases and offerings that we have yet to create. And if there's enough confidence out there, and there is among many of us, including the four of us in this room, that there is money to be made, there's a gold mine to be made from this connectivity, then and cities, many cities, including the city of Atlanta, are recognizing that, and they're prepared to share in that revenue that will come 3 years, 5 years, 10 years out. And some cities are actually going, you know, to the next, taking that step by saying, we want you to participate in creating the future vision, and if you help us do it, we will give you whatever share of the revenues across these 40 use cases over the next 10 years.
That's very cool. I mean, business
It's
models
very,
in
very
every
cool.
industry are going to be
have-
rapidly changed because of all of this.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the point of it.
That's the point.
Yes.
Right, so the question is basically is,
love that one.
what do we do about the lack of infrastructure that's available to support the emerging technologies? And I have one word for you, like, pass MARTA in Roswell for the traffic, but y'all go ahead and answer the question.
I'll talk to that because I think it's an excellent question. I don't think it's a dark cloud. I think it's a reality
It is a
question,
reality.
right? You can oftentimes focus on the IoT or the connectivity or whatnot, and what's the outcome to the people? I would argue that we're exploring these projects for exactly that reason.
Right.
We, as a city, will never be able to keep up infrastructure-wise with the demand. I mean, it's a classic example. You build another lane-mile highway, within about 15 minutes, it's full, right? There's always the latent demand, which means we have to change the very nature of how those assets get utilized, and that's what we're starting to do. So we're looking at how can we squeeze more availability out of existing lane miles? How can we do temporal shifting so that if you moved, and I've heard this number, I can't guarantee it's correct, but if you could shift, I think it's something like 10% of the vehicles on the roads to outside peak, you wouldn't have any traffic jams. Because we don't have a capacity problem, we have a temporal problem, right? Everyone's trying to use the same asset at the same time. So what I see as Smart City is saying, how do we change the usage of assets? Because we're not going to get infinite assets.
And that's what the pilots are for, is to figure that out, right?
That's
And
right.
how
See
it
which
all
ones have the
works.
most impact.
That's right.
I don't know if you've got a different view on it, but yeah.
Go, yes. So the question is how to leverage the new technologies to help the people with disabilities and accessibility.
I'll answer that quickly if I could, and we can take this offline. This is a very important topic. Accenture has begun discussions with a couple of nonprofits that are focusing on this very issue of making sure that we don't leave the disabled behind as we rotate towards the new digital. There's a great deal of discussion between Accenture and our friends at Microsoft and a couple other of our sort of commercial technology partners, if you will, including Brenna Berman in Chicago, who used to be the ex-CIO and is now the executive director of the City Tech Collaborative. So there is increasingly sort of a community, if you will, of those of us who care, and I'm one of them, by the way, about this issue of accessibility. And if you want to participate in that discussion, you're absolutely right that it's it hasn't been enough of a focus, but it's increasingly becoming a focus. And there is a group of us that are bringing together to discuss that, and it's likely to happen within the context of the City Tech Collaborative, which is a public-private partnership in Chicago formed by Microsoft, Accenture, the City of Chicago, and various other players.
So more locally, and this is a shout out to Georgia Tech, Deborah can't be here. We've got about half a dozen projects that we're working with
Yes.
Georgia Tech on exactly
Thank you,
that
Kirk.
question.
Yes.
How can we make transportation and mobility as a general service more accessible to the entire community?
And that's Deborah's whole role.
Yes.
Well, a lot of it.
He was just making a comment that reality, once people are aware of it, that they will be, the awareness is going to be a good thing overall in society, that once people are aware, and yeah, he wants to hear the question. You had a question back there with the mustache? Okay, the question is, what's the smartest thing that we have in the City of Atlanta right now, and what is the smartest thing that we are looking at in 5 years? This is a Kirk question, clearly.
Yeah, I'm trying to boil it down to one. So we've got a portfolio of about 90 projects.
So many.
We've got half a dozen that have got positive ROI, which I'd argue any one of those are pretty smart. We've got some that are sexy. We've got 2 examples of AI. We have artificial intelligence embedded in our streetlights, and we have crime correlation artificial intelligence taking place. I would say, though, that probably the smartest thing, well, we have 2 really smart things. We've developed an enterprise data platform where all the data, as people identify a desire to consume it, we're putting it on there and we can open up as an API. So we can feed apps, autonomous vehicles, anything that wants to consume it. That's one. And I'm going to come back to the RFP we put out, not just because we just put it out, but I think if it goes the way we're hoping, it'll be a game changer. It will change the way markets talk about smart cities. And if it works out, cross our fingers, we will have a funding model figured out that will then be able to democratize and not only get the data out to the people, it'll be able to put technology in the communities that would never be economically viable so that it's smart city for everyone, not just for the financially well-off.
Yeah.
I think that's huge. But again, depends on how people propose. So
I want to comment on both of those things. So the enterprise data portal and the open APIs does way more than just democratize the data. It also really encourages startups and businesses to be built on top of those things, which is good for the economic development of Atlanta, good for startups, good for entrepreneurs. I mean, it really opens up the door for a multitude of businesses to be born and to thrive. And then also the enterprise data platform, the implementation and seamless integration is really the ultimate challenge that everyone's dealing with. And if Atlanta can figure that out, that's a huge thing. And also Georgia Tech is also working on those problems with taking that data and looking at best practices of how to store the data, how it's requested, how it's protected, how it's indexed. I mean, how do you even find something? What's it called? How are you going to find it with this little piece of video? I mean, these are all huge problems that no one has figured out. So if Atlanta and Georgia Tech can figure these problems out, then that will accomplish the goal of Atlanta kind of setting the trend on that. So it's way more than just City of Atlanta. I mean, if they can do these things, these are worldwide problems that everyone's dealing with that Atlanta will have solved. So go Kirk. I think we're out of time. I'm getting cut off.
No, actually, it's 8 o'clock, but we're on a roll. So I'm going to give you the courtesy of deciding, do you want one last question?
Let's have one last question. You should have never given me that choice.
Woo!
I can't answer that.
He wants to know the 3 type companies that'll make an impact on smart cities in the future. I'm going to answer last.
I'm going to answer the second to last.
I'll go first.
Someone who's neutral needs to answer that
Airbus,
question.
right?
I am. I'm going to say the first one I think will be Siemens.
Twice. I agree. It's one of mine.
I do think Airbus, some way or another, will be there with our urban air mobility projects, with our data fusion, satellite sensors, high-altitude pseudo-satellites. I think there's a lot to offer there that any other aerospace company can't compete in. And then we're going to need a data broker. So I'm thinking Microsoft, Google, something like that. So I'm not giving you 3, I'm giving you 3 industries.
That's good. I like it.
All right, so officially I can't answer that because that's favoritism. But I am going to flip it around and I'm going to say, this is a chance. Stand up in this room and you know who you are if you represent a company that's been talking to us, even if we haven't actually executed, because I want you to understand there's a lot of companies we've been discussing.
Here's the list.
Oh.
Stand up.
Did you plan this?
No, I didn't know. Oh, well, no, so I want to say, literally, you know who you are, and I can point to some of you. Stand up in the room because there's a lot of company. It's more than Christian. Come on, stand up. That, I know. AT&T. I want you to stand up because we've been talking to, I can't tell you how many companies, and I can't play favorites as a city, but we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing if it wasn't for the companies in this room primarily, and the companies like Accenture and SAP and hundreds of others. So I can't list them in order because government can't have favoritism, but I want you to know it's all possible because of the companies like you guys.
I'm going to back that up. I mean, public-private partnerships are the key to an effective smart city, and it's something that Atlanta does really, 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 really well. And they're not only partnering with big enterprise companies, they're partnering with startups, and then they're also facilitating partnerships between those enterprise companies and the startups, and there's just a lot of collaboration, and it's just a big love fest, so.
And I'm certainly not going to miss an opportunity to put a plug in for my own company, since you put it out there.
Clearly.
But no, I will say this. The first thing is, I think, and this is sort of one of the common threads that we, I think, heard this evening. I came out of a presentation with, I'm going to say it again, Dubai, the leadership team of Dubai. And they were very complimentary about Accenture and the various players that we were able to bring to the table, friends of. And the thing that really struck me was in the elevator bank coming down was with Dr. Aisha bin Bashir. And she said, you guys are the glue. And I thought that was the single best compliment that we could have had coming out of that meeting, or practically any meeting, because I think as all of us said, those who can glue those various components and use cases together will be the companies that are the most valuable. And we consider ourselves part of that. We're not the only ones. We consider ourselves to be very good at that, frankly.
You are.
But those companies that can glue the ecosystem, the use cases, the governance models, and all these things together in a holistic approach, as we've all said, I think said at the beginning, are the ones that I believe are the most valuable.
I agree. Well, this has been awesome. Thank you so much.